long before the waves swallowed its towers, before the earth itself trembled in rebellion against the hubris of its masters. Atlantis stood as both a beacon and a warning, a civilization poised at the precipice of divine revelation and irrevocable ruin. The air hummed with energies unseen, where the veil between the material and the ethereal grew thin, and humanity walked a razor's edge between ascension and annihilation. Temples of crystalline light pulsed with the wisdom of ages, their geometries encoding truths now lost to time, while beneath them, in chambers veiled by shadow, other forces stirred, those who whispered of dominion not over the earth, but over the very essence of the soul. It was an era where choice was not merely a matter of action, but of eternal consequence. And then there was Edgar Cayce, a man of humble origins, whose ordinary waking life belied the extraordinary visions that seized him in trance. With closed eyes and a voice not entirely his own, he traversed the Akashic records, those celestial archives where the past is not dead but alive, breathing, waiting to be remembered. His readings spoke of Atlantis not as myth, but as memory, a civilization whose fall was not an accident of nature, but the culmination of a spiritual war waged in silence. He described beings who had once been human, or something like it, who in their hunger for power had severed the silver cord binding them to the divine. Their souls did not perish, they unraveled. Like smoke dissolving into the void, they became less than echoes, less than shadows, entities that persisted, yet lacked the spark that once defined them. What Cayce glimpsed in those depths was not merely history, it was a mirror. For if Atlantis fell because its people forgot their connection to the infinite, what does it say of our own age, where the sacred is so often traded for the immediate, where the soul's whispers are drowned beneath the clamor of ambition? The records he accessed suggest that some of these hollowed beings did not vanish with the sinking continent. They adapted, they learned to wear the mask of humanity, walking among us still, their emptiness disguised by the trappings of modern life. And if this is true, if the lineage of the soulless endures, then the question is no longer about the past. It is about the choices we make today. Let this be the first thread pulled from the tapestry of forgotten time. The next revelation waits in the silence of Cayce's trance, where the cost of power over spirit was measured not in gold or kingdoms, but in the currency of the eternal. And it is there we must go next. In the hushed depths of his trance states, Edgar Cayce did not merely observe the fall of Atlantis, he bore witness to the unraveling of souls. His visions, meticulously documented across thousands of readings, revealed a truth so profound it tested the very foundations of his faith. For among the towering crystals and advanced civilizations of that lost age, there existed those who had made an irreversible choice, the abandonment of the divine spark in exchange for dominion over the material world. Cayce described them not as mere mortals corrupted by ambition, but as beings who had systematically severed their connection to the eternal, until only a hollow echo remained. The weight of these revelations pressed upon him. In one reading he spoke of entities who had used their will against the will of the Creator, their consciousness hardening like stone as they delved into forbidden energies. They were not destroyed in the cataclysm that swallowed Atlantis. Rather, their essence had already begun to dissipate long before the waves rose. Cayce's voice, as recorded by his stenographer, trembled when he recounted how these souls became as shadows, walking in the light but casting no reflection of the divine. It was a spiritual erosion so complete that even he, a man who had spent his life bridging the seen and unseen, struggled to reconcile it with his understanding of redemption. What haunted Cayce most was the implication that their legacy endured. He hinted at bloodlines, not of flesh, but of influence, where the descendants of these lost souls carried forward a subtle, insidious detachment. They were not monsters, but men and women who moved through the world with a quiet absence, their choices unburdened by the moral compass that once guided humanity. His readings suggest that their presence in modern times is not a relic of the past, but a living question. What becomes of a soul that forgets its own divinity? And so one must ask, if such a choice could be made once, could it not be made again? Cayce's warnings were not of ancient history, but of a threshold humanity still stands before. The records of his visions remain, not as prophecy, but as a mirror, reflecting back the consequences of turning from the light, and the silence that follows when the soul's voice is no longer heard. Before the fall of Atlantis, the hollow ones who chose the abyss, they were not born without light. No soul enters existence untouched by the divine spark. Yet there came a moment in the twilight of Atlantis when certain beings turned their faces from the radiance that had once defined them. Edgar Cayce, in his deepest trances, described them not as monsters but as something far more unsettling, human vessels emptied of their essence. They had not lost their souls in an instant, but through a slow, deliberate unraveling, a choice repeated until only the faintest echo of their original nature remained. Their motivations were not mere greed or ambition, but a fascination with the illusion of mastery over life itself. Cayce's readings speak of a forbidden knowledge, a science of the spirit twisted into a tool of domination. They sought to manipulate the very currents of energy that bound the physical to the divine, believing they could ascend beyond mortality, not through enlightenment but through force. The allure was intoxicating: to shape reality, to command the unseen, to become as gods without the burden of divine law. Yet in their grasping they severed the threads that connected them to the infinite. Power, when wielded without wisdom, does not elevate, it corrodes. The consequences were not immediate. At first they thrived, their intellects sharpened by the stolen energies they harnessed. But a soul cannot survive on borrowed light. Over generations their descendants carried the hollowed remnants of what had once been whole. Cayce's visions described them as walking shadows, beings who moved through the world with human faces, yet whose inner chambers were silent, devoid of the resonance that defines a true spirit. They could mimic emotion, replicate ambition, even inspire devotion in others, but it was all a reflection, a performance learned from those who still possessed depth. And here lies the most chilling question: what if they never truly left? History whispers of bloodlines that rise again and again in moments of upheaval, of figures who shape empires and ideologies with a detachment that borders on the inhuman. They are not demons with horns, but something far more insidious, those who have forgotten they were ever anything more than what they became. Cayce warned that their influence lingers, not in grand conspiracies but in the quiet erosion of meaning, the slow replacement of sacred wonder with cold calculation. One must ask then, when you encounter a gaze that does not quite meet yours, a voice that rings with perfect logic yet stirs no warmth in your chest, could it be an echo of Atlantis? And if so, what does it mean for a world that no longer believes in the soul's fragility? The warning was never about them, it was always about us, and the choices we make before our own crossroads. The lineage of the forgotten. Do their shadows still walk among us? They were not erased. That is the revelation Edgar Cayce's trance visions pressed upon him with unsettling clarity. Those who surrendered their divine essence did not vanish into oblivion. Instead, their lineage endured, a spectral thread woven into the tapestry of human descent. The question lingers: if the bloodline persists, what remains of the souls who once chose darkness over light? And more unsettling still, could their descendants walk beside us now, their faces familiar, their eyes hollow where the spark once burned? Historical echoes suggest this is no mere metaphor. Ancient texts, from the Colburn Bible to fragmented Atlantean records channeled through Cayce himself, speak of a seed of the serpent, not a literal reptilian race, but a lineage marked by a severing from the higher self. The Gnostics called them archontic hybrids, beings whose human form masked a fractured spirit, forever seeking to fill the void through control, manipulation, or the hollow pursuit of power. The medieval grimoires whispered of bloodlines cursed not by gods, but by their own ancestors' choices, a karmic debt passed down through generations. And in the 20th century, Cayce's readings describe them as those who carry the mark in their aura, invisible to most but perceptible to those who learn to see. Yet how does one recognize such a lineage today? It is not in the color of their eyes or the shape of their bones, but in the absence, a subtle dissonance in their presence. They may excel in systems of dominance, politics, finance, or even spiritual movements twisted to serve ego rather than enlightenment. Their words often carry a hypnotic precision, their charisma a polished mirror, reflecting back what others wish to see. But listen closely, and you may hear the echo of Cayce's warning. They speak of unity, yet their hands build cages. Their ancestors' choice was not a single act, but a gradual erosion of empathy, a slow replacement of the soul's compass, with the cold calculus of self-preservation. And here, the mirror turns inward. If such lineages exist, might we all carry fragments of their story? The genetic memory of Atlantis is not confined to the fallen. It lives in the collective unconscious of humanity. That moment of choice, between light and shadow, repeats in every life. Have you ever felt an inexplicable pull toward destruction? A whisper urging you to betray your own integrity for fleeting gain? That is the old battle resurfacing. The descendants of the lost are not merely them, they are the part of us that still hesitates at the crossroads. So consider this: the next time you meet someone whose presence leaves you inexplicably drained, or when you stand before your own reflection and wonder why certain patterns repeat in your life, ask not if the lineage of the forgotten walks among us, but how. And then dare to ask the harder question: what will you choose to inherit? Before the fall of Atlantis, Edgar Cayce revealed who lost their souls forever. And so, as the echoes of those forgotten lineages lingered in the unseen currents of time, Edgar Cayce emerged from his trances with a warning, not as a prophecy of doom, but as a plea from the depths of cosmic memory. He spoke not merely of Atlantis as a sunken civilization, but as a mirror, one that reflected humanity's eternal struggle between the ascent of the soul and the descent into oblivion. His visions revealed that the true catastrophe was never the collapse of stone and sea, but the erosion of the divine within. If society continued to turn from the light, he foretold, the consequences would not be measured in centuries, but in the irreversible dimming of the human spirit itself. Cayce's readings described a world where material obsession became the new religion, where the pursuit of power, whether through technology, wealth, or control, would sever the sacred thread connecting humanity to its higher purpose. He warned that when a civilization elevates the self above the collective soul, it does not merely decline, it unravels. The Atlanteans in their final days had chosen machines over meditation, dominion over devotion, and in doing so they had not just lost their cities, they had forfeited their claim to eternity. Their error was not in progress, but in the abandonment of wisdom that should have guided it. Yet his most chilling revelation was this: the same forces that once fractured Atlantis were already at work in his own time, and by extension in ours. He saw a future where humanity, drunk on its own ingenuity, would repeat the cycle where wars would be waged not for survival, but for supremacy, where the earth itself would groan under the weight of spiritual neglect. The stakes, he insisted, were not political or economic, but metaphysical. To ignore the lessons of the past was to risk becoming like those lost souls, hollow vessels, moving through existence without ever truly living. And so the question lingers, suspended in the silence between his words and our own era. If Cayce's warnings were not heeded then, what does it mean that we stand at the precipice of the same choices now? The machines grow smarter, the distractions louder, the divide between the sacred and the profane ever more pronounced. Yet the invitation remains to pause, to look inward, and to ask, what legacy do we feed with our daily choices? The past is not a ghost story, it is a lesson, written in the language of consequences, and the future. It is still unwritten, but only for those who dare to remember why they were given a soul in the first place. The echoes of Atlantis in the age of forgetting. And so the question lingers, suspended in the quiet spaces between history and prophecy. What becomes of a soul that forgets its own light? Edgar Cayce, in his deepest trances, did not merely foresee the fall of Atlantis as an event confined to the past, but as a mirror held to every age where humanity stands at the precipice of the same choice. His visions spoke of a time when the pursuit of power would not be measured in towers of stone or fleets of gold, but in the silent erosion of the spirit itself. Today we stand in that time. Consider the modern world, where the temples of old have been replaced by skyscrapers of glass and steel, their spires piercing the heavens not in reverence, but in defiance. The same hunger that once drove the Atlanteans to harness energies beyond their wisdom now manifests in our obsession with artificial intelligence, genetic manipulation, and the relentless pursuit of material dominance. Cayce warned that when a civilization elevates the creations of its hands above the whispers of its soul, it does not merely lose its way, it risks losing the very essence of what it means to be human. The ancients called this the Great Forgetting, a slow unraveling where the divine spark dims until only the hollow echoes of ambition remain. History, if one listens closely, speaks in cycles. The fall of Rome was not merely a collapse of empire, but a surrender to decadence over virtue. The Dark Ages were not just an absence of light, but a period where humanity grappled with the consequences of its own spiritual neglect. And now, in an era where information flows like a river, yet wisdom feels scarce as desert rain, we see the same patterns unfolding. Cayce's reading suggested that those who lost their souls in Atlantis were not annihilated but scattered, their energy persisting as a shadow within the collective unconscious, a whisper urging modern minds toward the same abyss. Yet there is another thread in his revelations, one often overlooked. He spoke of the children of the law of one, souls who even in the darkest hours chose compassion over control, presence over possession. Their legacy too persists. It is seen in the quiet revolutions of those who turn away from the noise of consumption to seek meaning in stillness, in the artists who paint not for fame but for truth, in the scientists who ask not what they can extract from the world, but what they can return to it. The warning Cayce left was not one of inevitable doom, but of choice. He saw that humanity's greatest trials are not imposed from without, but arise from within. The tension between the ego's hunger and the soul's longing. To awaken in this age is to recognize that the same forces that once pulled Atlantis into the sea now tug at the edges of our modern lives. It is to ask in the silence of one's own heart, what am I feeding, the illusion of power, or the reality of my spirit? And perhaps in that question lies the key to breaking the cycle. For if Atlantis fell because its people forgot their divine connection, then its redemption and ours must begin with remembering. And so the echoes of Atlantis did not vanish with its towers beneath the waves. They lingered woven into the very fabric of time, resurfacing in lives that seemed to carry the weight of an ancient choice, one made in the shadow of the crystal of fire, when souls stood before the abyss and selected power over grace. Edgar Cayce, in his deepest trances, spoke not only of civilizations lost but of the lineages they left behind, souls who walked away from the divine spark, and now move through the world as hollow vessels, their struggles a silent testament to what was forsaken. Consider the tale of Elias Voss, a man whose name would mean little to history were it not for the whispers that followed him. Born in the late 19th century to a family of industrial magnates, he inherited not just wealth but an insatiable hunger, one that Cayce's readings would later describe as the mark of the unmoored. By 30, Voss had amassed an empire, yet those who knew him spoke of a man who could never be filled. He built libraries of occult texts, seeking in their pages what he had lost before birth, a connection to something greater than dominion. His journals, discovered after his disappearance in 1923, reveal a mind torn between two voices, one that urged him toward philanthropy, toward light, and another that hissed of legacy, of control. I dream of a city beneath the sea, he wrote in a final frantic entry, and in its ruins I see my own face. Or there is the case of Dr. Loyora Chen, a geneticist whose work in the early 21st century pushed the boundaries of human enhancement. Her colleagues admired her brilliance, her detractors called her reckless, but those who worked closest to her described something else, a woman who seemed to remember things she had never learned, who would pause mid-experiment and murmur of the old ways, of energies that could not be measured by machines. In private she confessed to a recurring vision, a chamber of crystal, a choice made in haste, a light extinguished. Her breakthroughs, she once admitted in a rare moment of vulnerability, felt less like discoveries and more like reclamations. Yet, the more she pursued them, the more she spoke of a growing emptiness, as if each step forward carried her further from herself. These are not mere anecdotes of ambition or madness. They are fragments of a pattern. One Cayce insisted was woven into the tapestry of reincarnation. The souls who turned from the divine in Atlantis did not cease to exist. They were bound to the wheel of return, compelled to relive the moment of their undoing until they chose differently. But the longer they resist, the more their essence frays. Power becomes their religion, achievement, their only sacrament. And yet, listen closely, even in their darkest hours, the old longing stirs, a dream of water, a flash of light, just beyond their grasp. One must ask, how many among us carry this same silent war? How often have we stood at our own crossroads, torn between the allure of control and the quiet call of the spirit? The legacy of Atlantis is not just a warning, it is a mirror. And if these souls so deeply entangled in their past can still hear the echo of what they lost, what might it say about the choices we are making now? The path back begins not with grand gestures, but with the willingness to turn inward, to ask as Voss and Chen did in their darkest nights, what was I before I forgot? Before the fall of Atlantis, Edgar Cayce revealed who lost their souls forever. Yet even in the darkest abyss of spiritual exile, the ancient traditions whisper of a return. Edgar Cayce in his deepest trances spoke not only of souls who vanished into the void, but of those who lingered at the threshold, beings who, though diminished, still carried the faintest ember of their divine origin. His readings suggested that redemption was never entirely beyond reach, though the path demanded more than repentance. It required a complete unraveling of the self, a descent into the shadows of one's own making, and an ascent through the sacred fires of transformation. The mystery schools of Egypt, those custodians of Atlantean wisdom, preserved rituals designed to rekindle the severed connection. Among them was the rite of the weighing of the heart, not merely a judgment in the afterlife, but a living practice of self-examination. Initiates would stand before a mirror of polished obsidian, reciting the 42 negative confessions, not as admissions of guilt, but as declarations of sovereignty over the fragments of their soul. Each utterance was a thread pulled from the tapestry of illusion, revealing the hidden patterns of their own undoing. The priests taught that a soul could not be lost forever if it still sought the light, however feebly. Even the most corrupted essence, when confronted with its own reflection, could begin the labor of recombination. In the East, the Tibetan Bardo Thodo offered another map for the wandering spirit. The text described the intermediate states between lives as a landscape of flickering visions, some divine, others monstrous. A soul adrift in these realms could still choose to turn toward the clear light of the void, but only if it had been trained in life to recognize it. The Lamas spoke of Fa, the practice of consciousness transference, where the dying or even the spiritually lost could project their awareness into a higher realm through sheer will and devotion. Here redemption was not a gift but a skill, honed through meditation, chanting, and the dissolution of the ego's grip. And then there were the Gnostics, those desert mystics who carried the forbidden knowledge of the Pistis Sophia. They believed that the divine spark within every human was a prisoner of the archons, the false gods of material power. Their path to reclaiming the soul was one of gnosis, not intellectual knowing, but an experiential awakening. Through sacred hymns and the contemplation of divine syzygies, the paired aeons of the celestial realm, the seeker could shatter the illusions of separation. The hymn of the pearl, a parable from their scriptures, told of a prince sent to retrieve a jewel from the depths of Egypt, only to forget his mission until a letter from his royal father reminded him of his true nature. So too, they taught, could the lost soul remember its origin, if it but listened for the call. Yet, Cayce's warnings linger like an echo. The window for redemption narrows with each choice that deepens the separation. The soul that clings to power, that refuses to surrender its illusions, risks the final disillusion, a fading into the collective unconscious, where even memory of its divine heritage is erased. But, for those who dare to pause, to turn inward, the path remains. The question is not whether redemption is possible, it is whether one is willing to undertake the journey. And so the invitation stands before you as it once stood before the Atlanteans. What fragments of your own soul have you left behind in the pursuit of lesser things? What ancient practices might you reclaim to stitch them back into the whole? The mirror of obsidian awaits. The clear light still shines. The letter from your royal father has already been written. Will you open it? The shadow of Atlantis and the light of our choosing. And so the question lingers, like the echo of a forgotten hymn carried on the wind. What does it mean for us now, this warning from the depths of Cayce's visions? For if Atlantis fell not by flood alone, but by the slow erosion of its soul, then we must ask, are we not standing upon the same precipice? The lost ones of that age did not vanish in a single moment of ruin. They dissolved, thread by thread, as their choices wove a tapestry of separation from one another, from the divine, from the very essence that once bound them to the infinite. And yet, their story is not merely a caution. It is a mirror. Cayce spoke of a time when humanity's collective spirit fractured under the weight of its own ambition, when the pursuit of power became a hunger so insatiable that it consumed the light within. But he also saw another path, one illuminated by the fires of shared purpose, where communities bound by love and mutual reverence became the vessels of salvation. The ancient mystery schools, the sacred circles of the Essenes, the hidden lineages of the Maya, all carried forward the same truth. The soul thrives in unity. It is not enough to seek enlightenment in solitude, for the greatest alchemy occurs when hands join in service, when voices rise together in sacred song, when the wounds of one are tended by the many. Consider then the state of our modern world, a landscape of glittering isolation, where connection is measured in fleeting digital pulses, rather than the deep resonance of shared breath. We have built towers of glass and steel, yet how many stand empty of meaning? Cayce's warning was never about a single cataclysm. It was about the quiet, creeping abandonment of our collective soul. The lost ones of Atlantis did not lose their essence in an instant. They surrendered it piece by piece. Each time they chose domination over compassion, secrecy over truth, I over we. But here lies the revelation. The same forces that once unraveled a civilization can now be the threads that weave a new one. The choice is before us, as it was before them. Will we hoard the light, or will we let it pass through us? A prism refracting grace into the lives of others. The mystery schools of old understood this. Initiation was never solely about personal ascension. It was about becoming a vessel for the collective awakening. When one soul remembers its divine nature, it sends a ripple through the fabric of all existence. So let this be the invitation to look beyond the illusion of separation, to seek out the eyes of another and recognize the same spark that burns within you. To build not just altars in temples, but altars in the streets, in acts of kindness, in shared silence, in the unspoken vow to carry each other when the weight grows too heavy. Cayce did not foresee an inevitable end. He saw a crossroads, and at this very hour, the path is still being chosen. Pause now. Feel the weight of this moment. The lost ones of Atlantis are not a distant legend. They are a reflection of what we risk becoming, and a reminder of what we still may save. And so, the echoes of Edgar Cayce's visions linger, not as mere whispers of a forgotten past, but as a living testament to the eternal struggle between light and shadow. His trances revealed more than the fall of Atlantis. They unveiled a timeless truth, that the soul's journey is not a path walked once, but a choice renewed in every breath, every thought, every act of will. The beings who surrendered their divine essence did not vanish with the sinking continent. Their legacy persists, not in the hollow shells of human form, but in the moments we too turn from the light, when ambition eclipses compassion, when fear drowns out faith, when the illusion of power blinds us to the sacred within. Cayce quotes warnings were never bound by the sands of time. They stretch forward, casting long shadows over our modern age, where the same crossroads emerge in new disguises. The temples of Atlantis may lie beneath the waves, but their lessons rise again in the choices we face today. Will we hoard knowledge as a weapon, or share it as a bridge? Will we worship the fleeting idols of control, or bow to the quiet wisdom of the heart? The lost souls of antiquity did not lose their essence in a single cataclysm. They eroded it, grain by grain, in the daily betrayals of their higher calling. And so must we ask, what small compromises are we making now? What fragments of our own divinity do we trade for the currency of the world? Yet Cayce did not speak only of warning. Buried within his revelations was a promise that no soul is ever truly beyond redemption, so long as the spark of seeking remains. The same forces that once pulled Atlantis into darkness now offer us the chance to rise. The choice is not between perfection and failure, but between awareness and oblivion. To reconnect with the divine is not to escape the world, but to see it anew, to recognize the sacred in the stranger's eyes, to hear the universe in the silence between words, to act not from fear, but from the unshakable knowing that we are, each of us, a thread in the infinite tapestry. Let this be the invitation, then, not to dread the shadows, but to kindle the light within. The legacy of Atlantis is not a tale of doom, but a mirror, and in its reflection we may yet choose differently.